I was trying to give you a thumbs up and I raised my hand. So high five you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rogers, are you back with us?
I'm eating. I probably will be off camera for a bit.
And Commissioner
No worries,
Willie is
Commissioner Rogers.
joining right back.
Commissioner Willie, are you with us? There you are. Commissioner Rogers will be off camera for a little bit longer while he finishes his lunch. So, Clerk Moss, do we have the afternoon recording going for the afternoon work session?
Yes, we do, Madam Chair. We are all good to go.
All righty. Thank you very much. So at this juncture, I'll turn it over to Ms. Mira Samantel and her team to take us through a review of the 18-month assessment of Emergency Ambulance Service Franchisee Metro West Ambulance. Thank you, team.
Thank you so much, Chair Harrington. Well, good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Board of County Commissioners. My name is Mira Samantel. I'm the Interim Director for Health and Human Services. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Marie Bowman-Davis, our Public Health Division Manager, to kick things off today. Marie?
Thank you, Mira. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, as Chair Harrington mentioned, we are going to review and discuss the results of the 18-month performance assessment of the Emergency Ambulance Services Franchisee Metro West Ambulance and share next steps. We are aware that commissioners have received a letter from Metro West, and we would like to request that you hold questions until the end of the presentation because we hope to do our best to answer them. And I will turn it over to Adrienne.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to do three main pieces. We're going to review the assessment that we did and our oversight responsibilities. We're going to talk about the findings in the current 18-month assessment, and then we're going to communicate the required action based on that assessment. Next slide, please. So to start with, just to give you a little bit of background and the context for this 18-month assessment, we work with the franchisee every month to do a good portion of the metrics. So 8 of them are part of our monthly metrics. And so every month we work with them to get their data, and in this case, of course, they is Metro West, and any exceptions that they're requesting. A pretty valid exception is they were stuck behind a train or they were stuck at a construction zone. Those kind of things where it's really unforeseen. So we work with them to take those specific transportations out of the compliance data. And then our compliance data, once the EMS team has gone through it and removed exceptions, it goes to our data team to crunch the numbers, so to speak. For the last 2.5 years, this process has been going, so we have very replicatable data. The process is very clean, and so we do the same thing every month. Part of those monthly compliance pieces, there's dealing with winter weather. So of course we just had winter weather yesterday, and our process is very stable around winter weather. As we know it's coming in, we have a touch base with Metro West, and their supervisors are really good about giving us really regular updates. So in the winter weather over the holiday season, we had almost hourly updates because it was so volatile how the snow and the situation was. Their supervisor at the moment says how many staff they have and how the roads are and where the roads are more slippery or less slippery, so that we're able to grant exceptions for those events. The primary reason there is that the roads are slippery, and so them driving faster in order to meet compliance is of no benefit to anybody. And so we have that in place as a regular process. We do that with other events as well. If something bizarre is happening, we have a routine touch base with Metro West. The heat dome was no different. So when we knew that the extreme hot weather was going to happen, we reached out to them ahead of time to ask if they were situated okay, if they were staffing up, what was going on. They voiced no concerns around their staffing, and actually said that they were prepping to have additional ambulances on the road in case they did see additional calls based on the high heat event. Of course, of note, there isn't a high heat isn't like winter weather where there's ice on the road or something that actually physically slows them down. But they, confirmed they were all set and able to staff that event. And we checked in daily with them through that event as well. And so those are our normal processes that we work with for our monthly compliance. Of course, then annually we work with them to coordinate trainers for our joint training. So what's neat in our system is our fire agencies and Metro West train together so that when they respond together, they do the same response, and it works really well. We organize what's called online medical control, which is a tool for the ambulances who need medical advice on how to handle a patient to get consistent. They all call the same place, so they get the same answers rather than calling the emergency room where they are heading. And so that's been in place now for many years, and we maintain that contract with OHSU. And then we license all the emergency transport vehicles, and we inspect all the new and a certain portion of the existing vehicles as well. Those pieces of information all then go into the 18-month assessment, which happens every 18 months. And I'm going to hand it to Tim to talk more about the 18-month assessment and to give you information around the specific areas of concern. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you, Adrian. And thank you, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. Next slide, please. As Adrian was mentioning, we review contractual obligations of our emergency transport vendor, Metro West, every 18 months as a function of that contract. And as you break it down, there's 40 or so areas that we kind of measure them against. Some are in a more general responsibility, things that you would expect of any contracted vendor. They maintain a neat and tidy appearance. They have well-working equipment. Their quarters and operations center looks presentable and professional, things like this. But as you break it down, they fall across three kind of functional areas. Those are operations, communications, and clinical areas as well. Next slide, please. So as part of the 18-month assessment, there's a large volume and a big variety of data that we consume to make sure that Metro West is adhering to or performing above expectation as outlined in our contract with them. And it takes some time to sift through all that. We draw data from their CAD, their computer-aided dispatch systems. We use recorded phone and audio files, listen to calls, human resources data, personnel files, training files, etc. And as you can see here, it's a brief overview of the overall results, some of which I'll touch on a little bit later. But as you can see, they met expectation on 18 of 25 key criteria. Earlier, I mentioned there was about 40 or so areas that we measure them against. 25 of them we feel are fairly key, with the first 8 or so being pretty the weightiest part of this, and those generally correlate with response times. So again, 18 of 25 key criteria were met, and they failed to meet expectation on 7 of those 25 key criteria. And of those 7, the first 6 were all response time related. I'm sorry, the first 5 were response time related. And that's meeting a 90% overall average response time in the county. And then The county is then further broken down into equity zones of the west, north, central, and south equity zone. Of those zones, Metro West failed to meet the 88% response time compliance in 1 or more months throughout this review period. The sixth criteria is a 1% handoff rate. And by that, I mean, of all emergency calls, Metro West can only turn over 1% or less of those to other agencies. And in Washington County, that would consist of our fire colleagues that have transport capabilities. Throughout this review period, in the latter months, that number steadily increased, with the last 3 months of this review period being above that 1% threshold. And then the seventh criteria that was missed is the submission of quarterly staffing and retention reports. Metro West failed to submit staffing reports, electing to submit them only as aggregate as part of the data requested for this review period. So throughout this 18-month review period, we did not receive quarterly retention reports and staffing reports from Metro West. And this, I think, is significant because it speaks to a larger issue of staffing concerns that Metro West had, and having those reports could serve as kind of an early warning sign of troubles to come. And without being able to see that data, we were left largely in the blind and in the dark to that information. I will say that throughout the pandemic, the EMS office routinely reached out to Metro West to discuss staffing concerns, and through each conversation, we were told that everything was okay, that there were no big issues with staffing. Additionally, there was a regional chief medical officer call that happened generally 3 times a week that discussed hospital capabilities, emergency department capabilities, throughput, and impacts from EMS as well. And prior to those meetings, either the EMS office or the EMS medical director would touch base with Metro West to discuss staffing and any concerns they had there, so we could give an accurate report out to our hospital colleagues. And again, each time it was noted that staffing was okay. Additionally, a big worry through the pandemic was a vaccine mandate. And as that mandate materialized and took effect, Washington County EMS again reached out to Metro West to determine the impact that mandate would have on their staffing and their ability to deliver EMS service to the county. And again, it was discussed that there was minimal to no impact from this vaccine mandate, and that staffing again would not suffer because of this. And as time progressed and through the latter months of the review period, in considering what you're going to see with their inability to meet response time compliance, they did submit a corrective action plan. And within this plan, it discussed a hiring and retention bonus, all of which was new information to us in the county EMS office, and also prompted the question of why offer such a significant sum of money to new hires and to retain current employees, to which again, the program reached back out to Metro West to inquire, and this is when we learned of staffing issues at Metro West. And this was in November of 2021. Next slide, please. This is the ambulance service area of Washington County, and you can see that it's broken into the response time zones of 8, 11, and 30 minutes. And within these zones, you can see the equity zones of north, central, south, and west, each of them carrying their own response times. Again, within the 8-minute response time zone, it's expected that Metro West respond and be on scene within that time, 88% of the time. And then when we take all calls from the county as a whole, that number needs to be on average 90% or higher. Next slide, please. And this slide again shows the response time zone map, but also shows a little bit more detailed in how many times that Metro West failed to meet compliance in those zones. I will note that a correction needs to be made to the overall, rather than saying 7 times, it's 6 times. There was 6 failed compliance months overall in this review period. So 2 happened in Central, and as you can see, 3 in North. South Zone was particularly difficult, and West Zone saw 3 months of failed compliance. Some talk about hospital divert and active zone management as contributing factors to the inability to meet response time compliance. I think it is important to note that Metro West is the zone manager for West Zone and has that level of control of ambulance distribution. There is a plan that has been developed and agreed upon, but it's left to Metro West to manage that plan. Whereas in our neighboring counties of Clackamas, Multnomah counties, it is left to the Medical Resource Hospital. So it's a third-party entity that controls those zones for zone management. And additionally, ambulance patient offload times have seen a lot of discussion as well. And while they did rise marginally throughout this review period, there was no real proactive plan put forth by Metro West Ambulance to combat this rising patient offload time. They did develop a process in which an EMT would be deployed to a trouble hospital after an issue was kind of discovered, to mind patients to free up ambulances to return to service faster. But again, it was retroactive in kind of its triggering. Next slide, please. So again, of the monthly assessed metrics, this is another kind of higher view look where the previous slides discussed the response time compliance. This is a snapshot of unit hour utilization, which is kind of a standardized shorthand way of measuring workload or efficiencies. Metro West is kept to a 0.45 cap of UHU. They kept their contractual obligation in check with that and had an 18-month average of 0.37, and no month did they go higher than the 0.45 cap. Dispatch an ambulance within 60 seconds. Again, they maintain standard there. And here again is the less than 1% response by other agencies in which they did not meet compliance with for the last 3 months of this assessment period, all of which exceeded the 1%. So what that does is it adds, puts additional burden on our fire colleagues to maintain response readiness, in that in some instances they need to unstaff a fire apparatus to staff up an ambulance to transport and service the call. Next slide, please. Here are some non-time-based metrics, again, in the operations section of those 3 broad brushstrokes that I talked about earlier. Participation in county, regional, state committees, associations. Metro West has been an active partner and contributor to different state committees and associations, and has, again, held up their end of the contractual agreement there. Through communications, it's maintaining a functional CAD-to-CAD bridge. This is an area of current work. Again, this is something that they've maintained, but there's further work to make ambulances more visible to our communications colleagues, so that the closest appropriate unit can be dispatched, rather than dispatching just an arbitrary Metro West unit and having it later assigned by Metro West Ambulance's dispatch center. And then the clinical aspects is, as Adrian mentioned early on in this presentation, the assisting the county in providing training to fire service personnel. They do sponsor EMT candidates to go through EMT school to help build staff that way, generally through the West End fire departments that rely on volunteer help more specifically, and also in the creation of didactic information for multi-agency training that happens at least annually, with hopefully the move to 2 times a year. Next slide, please. And again, here are 3 just of the dot points for some of those other general responsibilities that we would hold any contractor to, and that's maintaining neat professional appearances, establishing mutual aid agreements so that if our neighboring counties or even other departments are struggling with particular things, these agreements can be exercised. So there's no little to no service disruption for those neighboring partners. And then coordinating and conducting timely and relevant continuing medical education. Next slide, please. And this is where I will turn it back to Adrian.
Thank you. So really the key place here is unlike normal 18-month assessments, there's really no decision point for the board this year as we're beholden to what is stated in the franchise agreement. With them failing on separate standards set forth in the assessment, the franchise agreement will become a 4.5-year contract. We won't extend it the additional 18 months that would happen if this 18-month assessment had been passed. I think a few important things to note, in what Tim has already said, is that our expectation is that Metro West, shouldn't be relying on our exception process to maintain compliance with the metrics. We expect situations will arise like winter weather, or well, I guess we don't expect heat domes, but heat domes and other things. There are emergencies that happen. And our expectation is that that the system, Metro West included, will be nimble and find creative solutions that keep the metrics being met and keep the people who are in Washington County calling 911 getting the expected good response that has been provided. I might also say that our franchise agreement does allow for an appeal process for Metro West in this. So they have already, of course, seen the draft 18-month assessment and were helpful in noting a few little pieces that we've updated. And then if they want to appeal when it's final, there is an appeal process in the franchise agreement that allows them to do that. And from there, I would open to any questions. And there's no more slides, so the deck can come down, I think.
Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions on this information from staff and the staff required, well, it's the staff required action. So they're just coming here for us to be informed about this information and to see if we have any questions as they move forward. Go ahead, Vice Chair Willie.
Yeah, just to make sure that I remember our conversation last week when you briefed me a little bit in advance of this. The last reporting period that this information in the slide deck you just gave us, what is the date of that? I mean, is it December 31st or is it March 31 or what is that?
Yeah, it ended December 31st and covered the 18 months up till that point.
And we don't have any data for the first 3 months of this year?
We have some. Our compliance usually runs about 6 weeks behind. We have the compliance data for January. It is almost finalized now. And then February and March, we're in varying stages of processing exceptions and figuring out if they're compliant.
And we've already pretty much made the decision a few months back to start this 18-month period, right? I can't remember exactly what that is, but I think from our conversation the other day is basically we are in the mode, we've already made the decision to go out to RFPs.
No,
Or is that what we're going to do today?
in January, we gave Metro West the notice that we were considering leaving the franchise agreement, and we owe a response to them by June. And in the meantime, we're reaching out and assessing the situation to find out what our recommendation to you will be on that decision, and that will come to you in early May.
Okay.
They're currently about 3 months into the next 18 months. So we're ongoing compliance as we normally would.
Well, I think, and you said you'll do that next, is that I'd be interested to have your response to their letter, which appears to have different statistical evaluation than you do. So I'll be interested to hear your response to that as well. I think I understand the direction we're going. So today is just informational. There's I can't remember what the request is that we have of this.
Yeah, on a normal 18-month assessment in previous years, we would have been coming to you for your agreement or your decision to extend the contract 18 more months. Because this is a failed 18-month assessment, that there isn't a decision to be made. It's kind of written out in the franchise agreement what happens next. And I can tell you, I know that in the letter, about 2.5 pages were spent on the 90th percentile language. Those aren't any part of our metrics. So a franchise agreement really spells out what we assess and how we assess it. And so those are interesting numbers, but not something that is part of the metrics that we use to assess Metro West. And I don't know if Tim, if you have better words or clearer words to use on that or not.
No, I think with that speaking specifically about the 90th percentile information that was contained within the letter, that is not something, that's not a measuring mechanism that we use as part of the contract in looking at compliance. It's an average percentage of calls that meet the threshold time response. And that information was only brought to our attention or introduced to us within the last week or so with no other further discussion about it. So I think we'd have to really look more at it. But again, it's not relevant to their contractual obligations.
So again, refreshing my memory from this, the 18-month period that you're talking about here began January 1, and the 18-month ends June 30, 23.
So I think what you're asking, Commissioner Lilly, is this 18-month review period that we're presenting today started 1 July 2021 and continued through 31 December 2020 for July, and then carried through 31 December of 2021.
Correct. And
yes.
But right now we're
yes.
in an 18-month window.
Yes.
In which case we make a decision, final decision in May is what my notes say. The final decision in May that the RFP is going to go out, and we will have a new contract, maybe with Metro West, maybe with somebody else, but that will be effective July 1, 23. So I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand all this, and I guess that's not. I apologize. I didn't mean to deflect to dates here. Well, obviously, I don't understand. I don't understand what happened here, but so I'll be anxious to hear what your response to the letter is, yeah. So I'll just wait to hear the response to the letter. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I bumbled through that pretty good.
Commissioner Willie, just to clarify, the issue we're here before you today with is really the 18-month assessment of Metro West. And the topic we're talking about for May is truly a separate issue, not pertinent to their specific contract agreement.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification, because yeah, that makes much more sense than what I was babbling about. So I get it, and I'm willing to listen to your response to the letter then. Thank you.
If I could also, Commissioner Treese, before turning it over to you, summarize back to staff what we heard. So there was this 18-month contract period from July 1 of 2020 through December 31 of 2021, which Adrian and Tim have done the analysis of. And because of the lack of compliance, as things have moved forward into this subsequent 18-month period, what our staff is informing us is due to the failures from that prior 18-month report, the provisions of the franchise agreement say that there isn't an automatic 18-month renewal of this perpetual or evergreen, that's the word, evergreen contract. And instead, the contract per the franchise agreement now the franchise agreement now provision has been invoked to become a 4.5-year contract. I got that right. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Treese, please take it away.
Thank you. Tim, could you go back to page 5, please? And I'm hoping that by looking at page 5, I remember my question.
Slide 5?
Slide 5, yes.
Okay.
So it was during this slide that you talked about some of the situational pieces and the non-compliance. And this is an obvious question, and I assume that the answer is going to be yes in big bold letters. But I want to make sure that everything has been documented, and that not only is it documented, but the interchange between us and Metro West is documented in full context. That's I just want to make sure that that's historically represented.
To answer that question, there is documentation of various conversations through email in convening meetings, and a few check-ins on weather situations and staffing. A lot were convened via phone as we progressed through, particularly the heat dome, attempting to make phone contact with Metro West in real time, rather than on a Saturday sending an email waiting for reply possibly on a Monday. There were a lot of phone conversations.
And it's actually, the email is obviously retrievable. I just wanted to make sure that the documentation exists for some of the other conversations as well, by phone, by Zoom, whatever it might be.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Fye or Commissioner Rogers, do you have any questions?
No, I'll start first. I appreciated the briefing from staff. Maybe I'm the only one who hasn't received the letter or read it anyway from the vendor. I haven't seen anything, so I'm relying on the staff work that was done. It seems thorough. I don't understand all the implications, but I think I understand some of them. Oops, I guess am I still off video? I'm still off video. I didn't realize that. Okay. So I don't. I think the process will play through, and I'm disappointed that we're at this point. Nobody wants to be there. It's really disappointing. So I think staff has done what they can do to try to bring this forward in some kind of a acceptable manner. So I'm fine with the direction.
Commissioner Fye? Thumbs up? Okay. I just have one remaining question. Understanding that the franchise agreement now has invoked the 4-year contract provision, could you please remind me what time frame that 4.5-year contract time frame is? Does it go January 1 or how does that work?
Yeah, so it starts from the January 1 and then goes to June 30th of 25.
3.
So, but yes, it starts January 1 of 2022 and then 4.5 years. And there is provision within the franchise agreement on what happens if Metro West fails again, or what happens for Metro West to earn back to the 6th year. Those are all outlined in the franchise agreement as well.
Okay, so if my math is correct, 4.5 years from January 1, 2022 will take us through June 30th of 2026.
That looks right, yes.
3, 4, 5, and 6 months of 26. Okay, thank you very much. Just to close, commissioners, any last questions?
Well, yes. Okay, I'm really confused on this date thing. Okay, so I get the 4.5-year contract, but he doesn't. Metro West doesn't have 4.5 years to go. We're going to go out for a RFP for effective July 23. So where does that come into play?
Please.
If I understood things correctly, Commissioner Treese, that will, excuse me, Commissioner Willie, sorry, I'm looking right at her window. That subject will be coming back to us in a work session in May. Does that meet your pleasure for us to hold on that until then?
Are you asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I think I'm starting to get this, but and so maybe I'll just have this conversation offline, so maybe I can understand dates. And then the other one is, so I thought we were going to have a discussion about this letter. So are we going to put a hold on that as well? Because I really would appreciate a response to their statistics as compared to our statistics, and make sure I have some clarification and understand which one's right or whatever. So
yes,
I need to make sure that we address that letter. Now, if we're not going to do that
yes,
now, then we can do it
correct.
later.
Correct. Now is not the appropriate time. The letter just came in, and with all correspondence, where we ask our direct reports in the form of Ms. Angie and Mr. Carr to work with their staffs so that letters that are addressed to the administration are addressed by the administration, and that letters that are addressed to the board, that we have the opportunity to choose to address as the board or as appropriate respond via from the administration. So that's something that I know they currently have on their plates to look into and get back with us. So it's very much a work in progress.
Okay, and we should make sure that Commissioner Rogers has a copy of this letter. If he doesn't, it kind of came in a discombobulated fashion. Nafisa, do you have a copy of this letter?
I don't believe I do. That's why I was shaking my head when Commissioner Rogers was saying that he didn't have it.
Okay, so basically 3 of the 5 commissioners have this letter. Is that correct? Pam, I know that you were the originator of it. You got it first, and I thought you sent it out into the entire board. So, okay, yeah. Could we make sure that everybody has this letter?
Just for clarity, I received the letter, and it was CC'd to everybody, and I mentioned it to you, Commissioner Willie. You said you hadn't received it. I then went to Brad Anderson to ask for clarification if it was okay if I could send it to you. So I didn't realize that nobody else had. But my understanding is that the chair received it as well. So it's very. I'm
so
sorry.
It's not confusing. Like all letters that come into the board, we have a process by which our staff turns around all constituent information to the board. So I know I checked in with staff to make sure that they have it, and so that we know that it goes through the appropriate process so that all board members have it as well. The letter is not the topic of conversation for today's meeting, but it has been referenced that a letter has come in.
And we wanted to make sure that all the commissioners got it. Okay, because it didn't follow that procedure for this, but that's okay. As long as everybody's got it, I'm good with it. So, all right.
I'm not responsible for the implementation of that process. Our administrators take care of that for us, and I believe they're working on it.
To be clear, this letter will be included in the BCC constituent report along with a staff response. We receive constituent requests through multiple forms, individual commissioners, all commissioners, sometimes copied to commissioners. So we try to collect these the best we can so that all commissioners have the same information from a letter to also this, and also including the staff response.
Staff, do you have anything to close? Anything further?
Just an appreciation of your time and.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll then transition on to our next topics.
Hey, Chair, just as a weather update observation, we've been sitting here since 9 o'clock. I have seen sunshine, heavy rain, sleet, and it's now hailing. So we're getting the whole gamut today. It's a good weather day.
Thank you, Al Roker.
Okay, well, back to our work session agenda. Next, we'll move on to topic 7. Still with Ms. Samantle, there she is, and staff on proposed amendments to the solid waste and recycling administrative rules and proposed collection rates for additional recycling collection service. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chair Harrington, Board of County Commissioners. For the benefit of the public who might just be tuning in now, I'll reintroduce myself. So I am Mira Samantle, the Interim Director for Health and Human Services. We are pleased to be here before you this afternoon for this topic. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Tom Eggleston, who is our Division Manager for Solid Waste and Recycling. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you, Mira. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. Nice to be with you this afternoon. As Mira mentioned and Chair Harrington mentioned, we're here to talk about additional recycling collection services, and specifically administrative rules and proposed collection rates. Next slide, please. So the purpose and desired outcome of this meeting are on the slide here and in your work session packet. The purpose is to provide your board an overview of the proposed amendments to rules and collection rates related to additional recycling collection services. And the desired outcome is for your board to provide feedback on proposed changes and authorize an action item for the April 26th board meeting. Next slide, please. The policy question that is before you today is, should the solid waste and recycling administrative rules and collection rates be amended to implement a new additional recycling collection service program? Next slide, please. So starting off with a timeline, I'll make sure I keep up with my notes. This is a timeline of the discussion related to additional recycling collection services. Prior to this timeline, there was a conversation happening at the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee. It is a little bit of a separate issue because it was related to an exemption request from Ridwell Inc. These issues are related, but we decided to start this one up in the conversation after that decision was made by that committee. So November and December of 2021, last fall, the staff put out a community survey asking community members what they would value from an additional recycling collection services program, what types of materials they would like to see collected, and how they would like to see a program like that delivered. On January 18th, staff attended your board's work session, and your board provided direction to staff at that work session to pursue an additional recycling collection services program within the current regulated solid waste collection system, and also work to develop a temporary rule that would allow other persons, including Ridwell, to provide additional recycling services until such a time as a program in the regulated system was ready for consumers. On January 25th, staff returned to your board with resolution and order 2215 to temporarily allow other persons to collect recyclables for compensation as discussed on the January 18th work session. On February 10th, staff attended a meeting with the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee to talk about the community survey and receive input on program design for a potential additional recycling collection services program within the regulated system. On February 22nd, staff sent a draft administrative rules out to interested parties list for public comment, posted opportunity for comment on the Solid Waste and Recycling Hot Topics page, and shared draft rules with the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee in advance of their March meeting. On March 10th, the Garbage and Recycling Committee met again to discuss the proposal that's before your board today, and the GRAC voted to favorably recommend both the rules and the rates to your board. April 12th is here for us today. You'll see the dots turn orange or yellow, and we are here today to talk about this program. If your board decides to move forward, we'll be back on April 26th, and if your board approves a program, it is currently set up in the draft rules to take effect on July 1st of this year. Next slide, please. So we wanted to back up a little bit and talk about the benefits that have been discussed through this conversation of a fully regulated services. Staff have identified 4 key benefit areas that we feel are important to frame this discussion on. First, we think equal access to waste removal services is paramount. In a regulated system like our solid waste recycling collection system that is based on a franchised approach, equal access is paramount to that system. A customer at the far reaches of our community receives the same service as a customer close into our community, or a community member in a lower income neighborhood receives the same services as a community member in a higher income neighborhood. We also feel that regulatory safeguards are a big part of our solid waste collection system. We regulate all types of things from solid waste collection vehicle standards to insurance requirements, to safe handling requirements, to environmental standards on our solid waste collectors to make sure that they're meeting the standards that our community expects when they remove waste from their properties. Another part of our system that is important is fair and just rates for all. This doesn't mean low rates or cheap rates, but it does mean that the rates are evaluated based on an open, transparent process. They're approved by your Board of Commissioners, and they pay for reasonable costs incurred by collection service companies. And those includes living wage jobs, union salaries, and other eligible expenses that our county reviews on an annual basis in our rate review process. And finally, we feel that the regional vision and values are important as embedded in the 2030 Regional Waste Plan. And those values include promoting good living wage jobs for waste workers, offering accurate education and information, incorporating reduction, reuse, and repair into programming, and ensuring quality services for all of our community members. Next slide, please. So the program that is laid out before you today in the draft administrative rules has a variety of features. And this slide kind of gives an overview of those features, and we can dive a little bit more into the specifics in the next slide. The first feature is there's no subscription required. This is based on some feedback we received from community members in the survey that they did not need to access the program as frequently as regular services. I would like to see this service as a quote unquote on-call service. That relates to our next. Also, no service commitments. Community members do not have to stay committed to the service for a period of time. The second point relates to on-call collection. This was again based on feedback from community members. They wanted to use this service on demand to remove materials from their properties when they felt they needed to use the service. Another feature is that this program would be supported by bilingual content and expert customer service at both our service providers and through county staff at the Solid Waste and Recycling Division. We also feel that this service creates an ability to change over time, adapt to the marketplace, and innovate along with the Recycling Modernization Act, which was recently adopted by the Oregon legislature. We see this as a potential program to on-ramp new materials into the collection system if those materials are deemed to be acceptable for the recycling facilities to be able to sort them or separate them from other garbage recyclables. We have also incorporated reuse drives or reuse events into this program, and that includes using the regulated solid waste collection system to participate in quarterly reuse drives where community members would be able to access collection services for picking up items needed by local reuse organizations. And finally, the program includes a two-phased implementation. Phase one includes making services available to single family through fourplex households, and phase two of implementation includes making the service available to multifamily households. Next slide, please. The materials included in the program were also informed by community surveys. The top two materials requested by community members included plastic film and bags, and number one, plastic clamshell containers. These you can see on the slide here. We have an estimated volume of the material, or I guess weight of the materials in our solid waste collection system. We also have textiles included in this program and compact fluorescent light bulbs. Even though those light bulbs are phasing out of our system, they still do pose a potential hazard for small trace amounts of mercury in them. We are also proposing in this administrative rule package that batteries be added to the standard garbage and recycling service. So this would not be part of the additional recycling service option, but would be added to everybody's service collected in glass recycling bins. Next slide, please. The administrative rule amendments that are included in your work session packet are included on pages 20, 22, 23, and 28 of that document. A quick overview of those rule amendments would make the service available to urban residential customers. There's conversation about rural customers as well. We need to gauge interest in the rural communities and understand the cost differential between the time between stops in order to evaluate a service cost estimate for that type of service. So that could be something that comes down the road as well as we evaluate the launch of this program in the urban unincorporated areas. It includes materials as identified on the previous slide that would be contained in provided bags provided by the service provider. Bagged materials would be placed in a 15 to 25 gallon lidded bin. I believe the bin has been identified as an 18-gallon bin with a 2-gallon reservoir on the lid, so a 20-gallon bin. Customer requests pickup available every other week. There also includes a reuse drive for quarterly reuse events, and also batteries added to the existing glass bin as mentioned. Next slide, please. The fee structure proposed in your packet includes a structure that would create an on-call type collection service. This on-call service is aligned with our garbage on-call service in the county, which includes a base charge fee for participating in the program and being a customer with the service provider. The base fee in this program is $2.50 per month, and then each pickup would be charged at an on-call rate, an additional fee. Curbside pickup would be $9.25 per month. Non-curbside pickup less than 150 feet would be $11.70 per month, and then non-curbside pickup for more than 150 feet from curb would be $13.02 per month. Next slide, please. We did do quite a substantial amount of community input to gather and build this survey proposal, this program proposal, I'm sorry. The Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee, as noted, met on March 10th. The committee voted 6-1 in favor of the proposed administrative rules. Excuse me, 7-0 in favor of the proposed rates. A little bit of an overview of the survey, which has been incorporated into this program. 2,100 community members responded. 96% were either interested or may be interested. We did note this is an opt-in survey, so we are not assuming that 96% of our standard customer base would be taking such a program. Top materials ranked are plastic film, number one PET clamshells, styrofoam, and batteries. And 64% of respondents expressed interest in something less than every other week, potentially a monthly or even less frequent service, like a quarterly service. We held listening sessions with community partners at the Promotorias Ambientales. group out of Central Cultural, and some of the feedback from that group was talking about who pays, incorporating producers into our solid waste systems, focusing on waste reduction, and then highlighting that these services often do not benefit members of apartment communities. I would also note that we've received a substantial amount of input from community members directed at the county through Ridwell's form letter campaigns. We recently had another one initiated last week. We've also experienced public comment from those community members. Those comments are not necessarily directed at these administrative rules. They're more directed at the larger policy decision on whether or not additional service providers are allowed to operate in the county's currently franchised solid waste collection system. Next slide, please. That's it. Next, and back to our policy question we can land on is, should the solid waste and recycling administrative rules and collection rates be amended to implement a new additional recycling collection service program? And I'm happy to take any questions and discussion.
Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. This is what I was hoping to see. So I'm really pleased with that. Thank you for the in-depth work with our community to address what the needs are. I have a couple kind of easy questions, I think, here. Number one, on page 9, you talked about pickup service at the curb, and then non-curbside pickup and further out non-curbside pickup. I don't know what non-curbside pickup looks like. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so our current garbage system allows for community members to get what we call a distance service. It's kind of a wonky term, but curbside is defined within 5 feet of the curb or roadside in urban unincorporated. So as long as the bin is placed within 5 feet of the curb or road, it's considered a curbside service. If a bin is placed more than 5 feet away from the road or curbside, then it's a non-curbside service. Oftentimes, community members will put bins along the side of their garage or on their porch or near their doorstep, and the haulers will come up and grab those bins and pull them down the driveways to service them. Some of our community members that require ADA access services also get the benefit of having that service at no additional cost through our regular collection system.
Great, thank you. I didn't realize that was an option. And the other question I have is, it was in the materials collected. Did I miss seeing styrofoam there?
Yeah. So styrofoam is not proposed to be included in the rollout of the program. There's multiple reasons for it. One of the reasons is it's very logistically challenging to collect. It's very bulky and takes up a lot of space on a collection vehicle. It's also expensive to process. We were looking at $9 to $12 per bag to collect it, which seems pretty expensive. And we are also concerned about the outlets. Styrofoam is currently recycled at Agilix, which is a chemical recycling facility. It is a good local facility, but there's some debate in the environmental community and the solid waste industry whether chemical recycling is actually benefiting the environment or what other outcomes that might be. So we felt a little bit uncertain about the environmental strength and benefit of that recycling process. So we didn't want to encourage our community members to incur extra costs to take materials there if we weren't certain it was actually providing an overall benefit to our environmental outcomes.
Great. And the other question I have is about, again, in the materials you talked about textiles. Is it limited to the bag size? Is it limited to a weight? What is the criteria there?
Yeah, so the bin is a 20-gallon bin. Once the lid is on the bin, it creates a little bit extra space. Each bag is 5 gallons. So the subscriber or the customer is able to fill the bin up with 20 gallons of material. So if they had 20 gallons of plastic film, they could put 4 5-gallon bags of plastic film in, or they could put 1 5-gallon bag of textiles and 3 5-gallon bags of plastic film. So it is kind of however many of those 5-gallon bags of those materials you can fit into that bin is what you can put out for that collection service.
And what are you proposing the bags are made of?
So the bags we're proposing are going to be clear plastic film bags. We looked into reusable bags and we looked at some life cycle analyses, and we're finding that the life cycle analyses has shown us it would probably take 500 years to pay off on an environmental footprint analysis for using reusable bags. The plastic bags will protect the materials from moisture, which is really important for some of our film markets, and would also be recycled with the film if they were dry.
Thank you.
Who would like to go next? Commissioner Willie has no comments. Commissioner Rogers, nothing. Commissioner Fye, nothing. Okay.
Could I just add, again, I want to say thank you. And this, I think in my district, this is it's a very hot topic, and it's been a hot topic for communication to me. And I just want to express my appreciation once again to everyone, including my fellow commissioners, for making sure that we look at this very carefully. So thank you.
I join you in that, Commissioner Treese. I've had lots of conversations with different people over the last, oh boy, what feels like a year and a half. So, boy, that exception process was a bit arduous, but it did bring out not only a lot of interest, but a lot of questions about how things might work logistically within our franchise system. I'd like to go back to slide 5, if I could. So I just want to highlight, because part of what we're dealing with is that we have a company that has provided a service without, I don't know if they've followed well, they certainly weren't part of the franchise system, but they're very good at marketing, and good for them. Disruptive technology companies generally are, and that's great. But we're in government and we don't always tell our story very well. But this slide really illustrates the difference between where things were at in the earlier part of our interactions with the Ridwell service, that it was only available for a subsection of our community. And what this proposal provides is equal access throughout all of our urban unincorporated areas here in Washington County. The other is the factor of fair and just rates. So as Mr. Eggleston has highlighted for us, there has been a system to evaluate costs of service and the return on investment so that companies can operate profitably. And also regulatory safeguards, because our community members have expectations that this material is in fact recycled. And I think some of the really good questions that Commissioner Treese asked play into that as well. So that was my first point that I wanted to share. Then I have a quick question on the program features, the reuse drives. I'm done with that slide. Thank you for coming back to it. The reuse drives being quarterly, will those be available to everyone in the community in these urban unincorporated franchise areas, or will it only be available to those folks who are involved with this new on-demand service?
Yes, very good question, Chair Harrington. So the reuse drives that are envisioned in the administrative rules are available to the folks participating in the additional recycling collection service, but those drives are door side or curbside pickup service drives. So similar to when the mail carriers do the canned food drives, where they drop off a special bag and ask us to set out canned food for a food drive. They used to do that at least. This would be a similar service to that. There are community-wide events that our program works with and hosts. We have the repair fairs and Master Recyclers Planet Con events. Those events would continue outside of this program, but these drives in particular are actual collection drives that folks would just set out extra materials next to their bins.
Yep, thank you. And then my the other question is with regard to page 8 on the administrative rule amendments. So these administrative rules will, I need need you to clarify for me, because even though I reviewed all the pages, to whom they apply is something I want to make sure I fully comprehend. You say service available to urban residential customers. So will these rules apply only to the urban unincorporated areas?
Yes, and the rules actually apply to the service providers. So they are kind of they act like the terms and conditions of our agreement with the haulers. So, but they do only require the haulers provide the service to urban unincorporated areas at this point.
Yeah, so folks who live in the city of North Plains, Banks, and Gaston are not part of this, correct?
Well, the rules technically don't apply in the city boundaries of those cities, but say in the neighborhood right next to the city of Banks, that would be correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Similarly, with the cities of Beaverton, Hillsborough, Tigard, other places where I've seen Ridwell boxes, those franchises that operate within those city geographies, these rules do not apply.
Correct. The cities regulate their own collection systems.
Yeah, thank you. Because we've gotten correspondence from folks who reside in those cities asking us about the service, and we, on the responses, we keep trying to let them know, sorry, it's not us. So
I would note, Chair Harrington, we have been working closely with our jurisdictional partners, and we've shared our rules. We actually sent our draft administrative rules out for comment to the cities, and we received some feedback from Beaverton and Hillsborough in particular. So we know that they're working on similar issues and dealing with a similar topic, and we're trying to coordinate as much as we can at the staff level.
yeah, yeah. And so these rules will apply to those franchisees who have service areas in the urban unincorporated areas. If they don't wish themselves to operate the service, can they in turn subcontract with a company like Ridwell or someone else, as long as that such a service applies to these rules or follows these rules?
Yes, absolutely. Our code allows service providers to subcontract all or portions of their certificates to subcontractors. So they would have the ability to do that. They would have the ability to work together. We have a couple service providers that provide Dropbox service together through Washington County Dropbox, which is technically a subcontractor of several certificate holders. So that is a model they could assume if they wish to.
Okay, okay. And darn it. Oh, yes. I forgot to do a word search myself on the rules, but there was a constituent correspondence that was in one of our constituent reports. I remember it was with Mr. Pryor Garnett, and he was picking up on the word people. And I'm sorry, I forgot to check yesterday when I looked at the rules. Is that word, does it continue to be used in these rules, or how do these proposed administrative rules compare to that sort of sticky area, if I could, that he was pointing out?
Are you talking about like persons that may be allowed to provide additional services? Yeah, so the term persons is a term that's used a lot in our code to refer to the all-encompassing businesses, individuals, or others that may participate in the solid waste system. So the term persons is used in the temporary administrative rule, and it was used to align with the code that currently is written that way. So if that doesn't answer your question?
Yeah, yes, because some of our constituents have looked at the rules, and I was wondering, in the definitions page, do we have something that clarifies what that means?
So I do not believe we do in the rules document. We have it in code, and I'm looking right now.
Okay, right. Code versus rules, code versus rules. Okay, I should have looked to the code. Thank you.
So in code, person means any individual, public or private corporation, industry, co-partnership, association, firm, trust, estate, or any other legal entity whatsoever is a person. in code.
Could you remind me what code number to look at?
8.04, section
Thank you.
020.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That did it. Terrific. So moving forward, you've given us the opportunity to get acquainted with these administrative rules and to ask questions. So administrative rules, I believe, are such. And so is there a next step? Do we have to, oh, it is an action item for us to authorize the adoption of these administrative rules.
Yes, and if your board is comfortable with this proposal, we will be back on April 26th with that action item.
So commissioners, now is the time for a thumbs up. Okay, look at that. 5 thumbs.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. All righty, we're about on time. So at this juncture, we'll take a 15-minute break, and to make the math simple, why don't we just reconvene at 2:30? Okay, we'll see you back here then. Well, Commissioner Willie, that hail that you had at your house in Hillsborough, we're now having, it was sunny at that time at my house here in Beaverton. And it's pretty sizable hail compared to what we've gotten lately. So, wowie zowie.
Yeah, that's really hard on our strawberry crop. So I hope that's not very far along. But yeah, it's just raining now. So.
Well, and this weekend I was out admiring blooming tulips, and I can only imagine how battered they're getting right now. Yeah. Oh, well, all weather aside, hopefully the noise on my windows isn't coming across the microphone. We will turn to our next topic and welcome our experts in our Land Use and Transportation Department, led by Director Stephen Roberts, to give us an update on House Bill 2001, plus the associated Senate bill, and a preview of how we're moving forward with middle housing ordinances. A lot of good work that's gone into this. Thank you, team. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Wow, yeah, we can hear that hail. Oh my goodness. Thank you, and we wanted to just go ahead and give the board a preview of two ordinances that are coming before you next week for their initial public hearings. Ordinance 885 and 886, both addressing different aspects of the middle housing implementation as adopted by the state. And with me today, I have Teresa Cherniak and Ann Kelly from our community planning section. They're actually going to walk through the presentation. Then myself and Andy Back, our Planning and Development Services Manager, are here, and we'll all be available to answer questions and provide additional information if needed at the end of the presentation. So with that, go ahead, Teresa.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Principal Planner with Community Planning and the Department of Land Use and Transportation. So as Stephen mentioned, we're here this afternoon to give you a preview of two ordinances that have their first hearings next week. Both are to implement middle housing under House Bill 2001. So we have been here a couple other times in work sessions on the concepts about middle housing. And now we're finally here to talk about the actual regulations and hopefully moving these forward to get adopted and get implemented. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this briefing is to familiarize you with the content of both ordinances, to talk about the discussions over 4 hearings and multiple work sessions at the Planning Commission, and review the primary policy that questions that arose in those meetings. And then be able to answer any questions you have about the ordinances and the policy questions. And if you if you have any feedback or guidance for us at this point. Next slide, please. So you'll see a bit further into the presentation, the policy topics that were raised at the Planning Commission. They're somewhat technical and relate to a couple of the primary areas where there is some flexibility in the rules. One has to do with the idea of allowing duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes to be either attached or detached. Another about requiring sidewalks from both new and expanded single detached homes, as well as middle housing. And then certain garage design requirements for middle housing. So there are some policy choices in there, and we'll be asking the board whether you have guidance for us on those points at this time. Board feedback could include requests for more information or more research. So if there's anything more that you'd like to know or want to make sure that we cover in the meeting next week, you can let us know that. There is a staff report that will be available, probably was made available yesterday for the hearing on the 19th. So you won't have seen that yet, but that's a pretty thorough discussion of everything in the ordinance. But there may be some things in particular that you want us to cover, so please let us know that. Next slide, please. So in today's presentation, we'll give you a very short overview or refresher about House Bill 2001 and middle housing. We'll summarize the two ordinances and review the Planning Commission's discussion on the ordinances and their recommendations. We'll review how staff got the word out to the public about middle housing and about the ordinances. This happened in a number of ways and with a number of different groups. So we'll update you on that work and what we heard. And then we'll provide an overview of the upcoming board hearing schedule, which will include engrossment of the ordinance. And finally, we'll end with those policy questions. Next slide, please. So briefly, from the beginning, the middle housing bill, House Bill 2001, was adopted in 2019 with then very specific rules and a model code that were adopted by the state in late 2020. So we've been working on this for quite some time, and you've been hearing about our progress along the way. The intent of the bill was to provide more housing options in residential neighborhoods within the urban area. So this is an urban-only set of regulations. The idea was to break down the separation of housing types that are often found in newer neighborhoods, where often single detached homes are separate from multi-unit buildings. The bill requires most cities in Oregon and the urban areas in the 3 metro counties to allow a range of housing types between what you would think of as traditional single detached homes and multi-residential development buildings. Those would include duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, so 2 to 4 unit buildings, townhouses, and cottage clusters. In a lot of jurisdictions, the uses have been kept physically separate, but this hasn't been the case actually in Washington County. So our residential districts have allowed that range of housing types in all of our residential urban districts, with the exception of cottage clusters, which at this point we're only allowed in 3. So the county, for the county, the main change under the bill is to allow more units, and in some cases, like cottage clusters, allow them in more places. Many lots now eligible for just one house will be able to have more units, since density for middle housing is either not restricted or is much higher. So we'll still have setbacks and height limits and that sort of thing, but the density requirement is not allowed under middle housing. A good housing mix can help people of all ages and stages of life to live in the same neighborhood and have access to the same amenities. So housing diversity, we think, equals more economic diversity within neighborhoods. And middle housing can actually help existing property owners remain in place as they age. Next slide, please. In order to implement the middle housing bill and rules, staff has proposed 2 ordinances. One establishes the policy basis for the code changes, and the other makes the actual changes to the development code. So Ordinance 886, which will be the first one on your agenda next week, amends the county's comprehensive framework plan for the urban area, or CFP for short. That's the document that provides the policies and strategies for land use in the urban unincorporated area. It does already include policies that support housing affordability and housing choice and availability, both of which are advanced by the changes proposed for middle housing. While middle housing is supported by existing county policy, we did need to make some changes to better align them with the middle housing requirements and the current conditions, as well as the county's equity resolution. The CFP also includes the policies that establish plan designations, and we needed to update those to include middle housing. At this point, I'll turn it over to Ann Kelly, who will talk about the second ordinance, number 885, that focuses on the community development code changes. And we can go to the next slide. There we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. I'll go on to talk a bit more about ordinance number 885, which does amend our community development code. In the filed standards, we have looked to meet the basics of House Bill 2001 per the initial board direction we received a while back. Beyond the basics of the rules, we've also drafted standards that require sidewalk and right-of-way based on infrastructure concerns of some board and community members. And in order to apply these requirements to middle housing, they've also been required in the draft standards for one single detached dwelling. And this is new. But per the state rules, the only way that we can require sidewalk and right-of-way for middle housing is by requiring it for a single detached home as well. The draft standards also address review procedures for a single detached home and middle housing based on presence or lack of sidewalk and right-of-way. They address siting and design and parking standards. They look to facilitate ADU retention on middle housing sites. And they allow a duplex in floodplain and water-related resource areas, just as we do for a single detached home now. They provide definitions, and they do update some of our existing housing terms for equity reasons. For example, where the term family is used to describe a housing type. Next slide, please. As far as the Planning Commission review and action on these two ordinances, there was one hearing held for Ordinance 886. We held 4 hearings on Ordinance number 885 with extensive Planning Commissioner deliberations. Discussions focused on the concept of attached versus detached duplex units, triplex units, and quadplex units. How to treat existing accessory dwelling units, considering that they're not middle housing. Certain minimum window area standards borrowed from model code, and both staff and the PC will now recommend reducing those. Some garage size limitations for which the PC has recommended eliminating those. Staff will probably recommend just simplifying those and adding flexibility. Lastly, the Planning Commission focused intensively on right-of-way and especially sidewalk requirements. Planning commissioners voiced strong support for a potential future county fee program for sidewalk construction, though a vote did not pass after some difficulty in phrasing a motion to suit the majority. Ultimately, though, the Planning Commission supported retaining proposed right-of-way requirements, but deleting sidewalk requirements. Finally, the PC did recommend approval of both ordinance number 885 and 886 with some changes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So moving on to focus a bit on the detached plex discussion. Detached plex, or plexes, I guess, plexes, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes are most commonly known as attached units. The rules permit but do not require us to allow detached plex units. There are 10 local jurisdictions that we reached out to, and of those, they are roughly divided on whether to allow detached plex units or not. There are pros and cons to allowing them. If detached plexes are allowed, they're likely to be the dominant middle housing type. And this comes from our Eco Northwest study, as well as a planning commissioner who's in the industry. Planning commissioners reported that home buyers prefer detached housing and that as a product similar to a single detached home, which is the focus of many builders today, this is likely to be the easiest and most likely option that some builders will choose to build, and potentially the only one. Research also suggests that allowance of detached plexes may encourage middle housing in numbers, but at the same time, it might diminish potential for housing types that are diverse in form and cost. Urban land is a finite resource, so if it's primarily used for one type of middle housing, we're likely to lose a lot of it for other types. Ultimately, This came down to a priority question for the PC, the Planning Commission. Is it quantity that they wanted to prioritize or variety? And ultimately, they chose quantity to facilitate more housing creation during the ongoing housing crisis. Staff did suggest an option to wait and see the extent of detached plex building permits that come into other jurisdictions that plan to allow them. Waiting and looking to see what that ratio looks like. Are these types of housing dominating the middle housing market? And if so, through a future ordinance, we could consider allowing them or not, but potentially with some incentives for other middle housing types. Next slide, please. Moving on to the sidewalk discussion. Some PC members supported new sidewalk requirements for equity, safety, and community building reasons. And while not discounting sidewalk benefits, other members did not support the requirement. They pointed to past policy decisions not to require them for a single detached home, something we would have to do now in order to require sidewalks for middle housing. They noted related concerns regarding nexus and proportionality, relating to the impacts from one house, for example, on the transportation system, and whether those are balanced or whether our requirements might be disproportionate to development of one house. They suggested a conflict with state restrictions against local standards that would discourage middle housing through unreasonable cost or delay. We are not allowed to do that. They felt that small developments would be especially impacted, perhaps those where homeowners are the applicants. They also noted differences in community members' desires for sidewalks or not, independent of neighborhood price points. And as a community need, they also suggested that perhaps the community should pay or at least share the cost. Ultimately, they did again support the right-of-way requirements, but not the sidewalk requirements. And conceptually, they did support potential for a sidewalk fee in lieu that would enable the county to construct sidewalk projects. Next slide, please. Thank you. Moving on to garage standards. The filed ordinance does borrow some from model code, and these are intended to limit the scale of garages along street frontages. Planning commissioners opposed these, stressing the importance of larger garages for multiple cars, storage, quality of life, and marketability. Staff noted design considerations that have been implemented since the 90s to create pedestrian-friendly street frontages and ensure living space with visibility to the street for safety. We also noted that state middle housing provisions appear to prioritize living space over parking space, and that existing examples of middle housing units typically have single-car garages, alley-loaded garages, or parking provisions other than garages. The PC ultimately, though, did support deleting garage design standards. And these photos here show some examples of what you may see with middle housing. Quite small garages on the top one, rear loaded on the middle one, and very prominent garages on the bottom one. Next slide, please. As far as reaching out to the public, we provided presentations at 10 Planning Commission work sessions, and these focused on policy discussion, state rulemaking, market research, middle housing types, parking and design considerations, detached plexus public improvement requirements and related state limitations, and more. We also reached out through listening sessions and focus groups to engage historically underrepresented people, and through social media and an online open house. And those efforts focused on middle housing concepts and the associated need and benefits of middle housing. Thank you. Next slide, please. Public feedback that we received included, in terms of testimony, one person opposing the middle housing bill and ordinance overall, the Home Builders Association of Metropolitan Portland, and some individual builders strongly supported detached flex allowance. They stressed market preferences. They strongly opposed both sidewalk and right-of-way requirements, and they opposed the street-facing window minimum, which we do propose to reduce. The Urban Green Spaces Institute wrote us seeking similar minimum lot size, smaller minimum lot sizes and more flexible standards to protect trees and open spaces. Some community members shared very strong support for sidewalks and right-of-way. And in other feedback, we heard general interest in middle housing from builders, nonprofits and individuals, especially regarding cottage cluster developments. Some people also questioned whether middle housing provisions will bring needed change, and others voiced desires for less expensive housing, more types, even if smaller, affordability, especially for seniors and special needs groups, and street improvements for safe pedestrian travel. Next slide, please. Upcoming hearings begin April 19th, our first board hearing then. May 17th will be the second board hearing, and we're anticipating an order for engrossment that day. June 7th, potentially the first engrossment hearing, and June 28th would be the second engrossment hearing, with anticipated adoption of the ordinance and findings happening by the June 30th deadline. Next slide, please. Thank you. So moving on, policy questions and potential discussion today. In advance of the board's public hearings, which start on the 19th, does the board have feedback or preliminary guidance on the policy topics raised by the PC, detached plexes, right-of-way, sidewalks, garage standards, and does the board have other questions or feedback as well? Thank you.
Wow, a lot of really good material.
Thank you.
That was a lot of really good material. Sorry
Thank
for
you.
the feedback. I don't know what happened. So commissioners, who would like to go first? Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
I don't have a lot. I think it was pretty thoughtful. The only thing I have that I disagree with, and probably will continue to disagree, is you can't have communities if you don't build out the sidewalks and the system. I mean, I get it that people don't want to do that. I get it, it's expensive. I get it that some neighborhoods don't have them, but they never will. We'll be 2080 still looking back saying, what were those guys thinking back in 2022? I mean, why didn't they do that? And so I get that part. I'm not sure how the fee for not doing it would work, some kind of a participation fee or not. It still seems like we haven't accomplished what we need to do. So I'm not sure I really like that program. But those are my comments. The rest of it, I get it's there. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Through the course of the five of us, we may end up that there's a collection of things we want to come back to as a group. So thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. Jeepers. Okay, Vice Chair Willie.
That's okay. Let's see, you called me Commissioner Treese earlier, so I didn't know which one I'd choose. But anyway, Commissioner Treese, of course. No, as far as the sidewalks, I like this. But as far as the sidewalks, I think they're not just talking about neighborhoods with optional sidewalks. I think they're talking about orphaned sidewalks. So in other words, somebody maybe tears down the house, puts in a duplex, whatever the case is, but there's no sidewalk in front. and there's no sidewalk in the neighborhood. And so if they put in a sidewalk, it'd be the only one that had a sidewalk. Am I correct on that, Teresa, or am I being too narrow in my thought process with that?
And that could be the situation in some instances, and in other instances, it could be filling in a gap. So Anne, I don't know if you wanted to say
Sure.
anything more.
I think the draft standards anticipate both. We do provide some exemptions where sidewalk is lacking nearby within the proposed standards. And in some cases, it's likely that where there is not much development potential, those exemptions would be fairly easy to obtain. Otherwise, where it's simply sidewalk lacking and the neighboring lots have sidewalk, it's likely that the exemption wouldn't really be very easy to get.
Are we putting in? Are we talking about how wide the sidewalk would be there? Because we've had conversation in a neighborhood, and I think it was in Pam. It was in your district where we were talking about, I don't know, a 6-foot wide sidewalk connecting up with an 8-foot wide sidewalk, or the other way around. I can't remember what. So would this one have, again, would this just have a standard sidewalk width, or again, would it be negotiable?
This presumes the 5-foot standard concrete sidewalk. Exemption provisions also allow, in some cases, requirement of just an asphalt path. And there are some provisions where in special areas, we might have wider sidewalks, 8 feet, 12 feet, where sidewalks can be required to an extent, but not to the extent that they would exceed a certain very specific right-of-way requirement. Part of what we've done with right-of-way to make it clear and objective, which is required for housing by state provisions, to make it clear and objective, we've specified for middle housing and for one detached home, given right-of-way widths to center line. So where those might be exceeded by special area sidewalks, for example, we may not allow for that.
Okay. Well, generally, I agree that they should have sidewalks. But I think there needs to be an exception in there. And I don't know what we do if we just let the builder off. And we certainly don't want to start a side fund just in case someday the neighbors add sidewalks. I don't know how that works, but generally, I would agree sidewalks should be a part of it.
Thank you.
And maybe to the sidewalk question, I would just add too, we think there's a fair amount of work that would need to be done in order to craft a thoughtful, functional sidewalk program. So we would suggest doing that as a part of a separate future ordinance if the board were interested in pursuing that as a requirement going forward. And there are probably different ways that we could go about doing that, and we would just need some time to sort of walk through the logistics, the legalities, and the policy decisions around that.
Commissioner Treese, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, Anne, I think it might be your birthday. Am I right about that?
Oh my gosh.
Just, it's amazing what you know these days, right? Happy birthday. Secondly, you talked about the detached versus attached plexes. I believe you said that we might have an opportunity to see how other jurisdictions, what their experience is in relationship to the popularity, if you will, or the saleability of the different products. Is that within our region? Where are you looking?
We spoke to 12 jurisdictions, 10 locally. So we're looking at Beaverton, Milwaukee, Clackamas County, Oregon City, Portland.
Okay.
Yeah, basically our usual local partners.
So local partners, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we also did then look at the two probably bigger ones in the state that are also doing it outside of our region, Eugene and Bend. And there's a smattering of other jurisdictions. So, and then we looked more locally.
Thank you.
And just on that, locally, Beaverton, for instance, will be allowing detached plexes, and Hillsborough at this point will not. So kind of two of our main partners are split in that.
Commissioner Fye, you're the last one for this first round.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. I had a question along the lines of what Commissioner Treese asked, but in terms of sidewalk, what is the best practice programs out there for sidewalk development? And then I was wondering, how do similar jurisdictions approach sidewalk development, especially within our jurisdictions?
As far as the fee program, there are some examples locally. Portland has a local transportation improvement charge, which covers more than sidewalks, pretty extensive frontage improvements. And that is collected with development and then applied elsewhere so that they can do more complete projects in areas that are most in need. Clackamas County has a similar program for more extensive improvements and a separate one for just sidewalks, which I believe is $37.50 a lineal foot. And they say that is just kind of a drop in the bucket, but it does help. As far as requiring sidewalk for single detached homes, otherwise, some jurisdictions handle it apart from land use, just through a separate engineering review. There are a number of ways that it's approached, and some have had a great deal of constitutionality challenges and have kind of stopped requiring very much of anything in connection with small developments. And as far as the fee, discussions have been kind of leaning toward potential for one that would collect a charge that could be applied to off-site sidewalk projects more extensively, not necessarily something that would be an improvement to the specific frontage.
Yep. And I would add, I think that there's there are differences amongst even our local jurisdictions about which ones require sidewalks for existing single-family dwellings on a lot of record and which ones don't. So there are a number of these different policy areas where different jurisdictions have taken different approaches.
Thank you. And happy birthday, Anne.
Oh, thank you.
Made it yet another year around the sun. Well, first I want to start with thanking staff and the Planning Commission, especially the Planning Commission, for their broad and deep exploration of this work, particularly through the multiple work sessions and multiple hearings that they had on these topics. So, we would not have these sound proposals but for the work of staff and their engagement with the Planning Commission and the Planning Commission's patience in hearing input from throughout our community. I want to start first with something I'm just not clear on at all. Window requirements. Slide 13 mentioned it, but I don't know what the proposal is. What did I miss? what are we moving forward with?
That is a model code provision that's meant to kind of protect the pedestrian realm, provide some eyes on the street. It's a minimum percentage requirement along the street sides of flex units. And model code has it at 15%. We looked around a bit at what other jurisdictions are doing since having filed, and we propose to reduce it to, I believe, 12% in certain cases and 5% in others.
And what are your numbers, your proposals based on?
The 15% requirement originally came from model code, which had some designer input. But we looked around. Wilsonville was getting some kudos for their requirements, and so we are looking to recommend theirs, which are much less and differ for a single story versus a multi-story building. And then Teresa and I did some calculations and looked at some existing scenarios and how much window area 15% would be, and it did seem to be quite significant and probably excessive. So we are probably going to recommend the less extensive percentage. Do you have some input on that yourself, Chair?
I'm not sure I heard what's being recommended. So are you saying that the recommendation, what will be put in the ordinances that are being filed for the board hearing is 12% for some cases and 5% in others?
Okay, I'll be very particular about it. The current requirement is 15% across the board. We're looking to reduce it to 12.5% for a one-story structure. That's on the front facade. And on the street-facing facade of any unit, any type of structure, it would just be 5%.
Okay, that's clear to me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not trying to argue what it is. I was just trying to hear it. That's all.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
I have one clarifying question and then just a couple of questions on sidewalks. So on slide 7, it's titled Summary of Ordinances. But I think in terms of the presentation, I think you took us on a journey. Does this slide, I thought, presented what you started with, but not what we've ended up with as a result of the Planning Commission. So I'm just trying to checkpoint. Is this a summary of the starting point on the ordinances, or do you want me to understand this is the summary of the ordinances that will be part of the April 19th hearing?
This is the summary of the filed ordinance, which will be the subject of the April 19th hearing, though we will talk about proposed engrossments at that time too.
And yeah, maybe I could add a little clarification. So the ordinances have been filed, that, and that's what the Planning Commission hearings were based on, those filed ordinances. And so the list that you see here on this slide sort of covers the topic areas of the ordinances. And we anticipate at the April 19th hearing, we'll be suggesting some engrossments to the filed ordinances to incorporate some of the direction that we received from the Planning Commission. So suggesting that the board approve amendments to the filed ordinances, and then that would trigger additional hearings on the amended ordinances.
Okay, I believe I followed that. Is there a reason why the filed ordinances just don't start with what the planning commission has already recommended, or maybe I heard it wrong, but it seems like it's going to be very confusing for everybody that stuff's already been worked in the planning commission, yet what's going to be filed is before that. And so what are people commenting on? I mean, mess with a capital M is potentially what we'll have.
Right. And this is just our normal land use ordinance process. We actually file an ordinance, and that's the starting point for a discussion with the planning commission and the board. And then I don't know if I could put my finger on a percentage, but I would say probably more than half the time we do end up going through an engrossment process where amendments are made to the filed ordinance along the way to reflect recommendations either from the planning commission or the board or both. And so this is fairly typical, and it is a bit confusing. When I first came to the county, I was scratching my head asking the same question, but creating a filed ordinance simply essentially creates a public document that becomes the basis for all of the subsequent discussions and ultimately an adoption of an ordinance.
I might add that the ordinance doesn't officially get engrossed or changed based on the planning commission recommendation. That's just not how the process works. If the board accepts all those changes, then those changes are made. But it's you know, there's not a finality to the planning commission recommendation, but clearly it's a very important part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where I think we've been around this block before with our community members and how they come before us in the board hearings and even in side meetings, complaining to us about how they have to do this work twice. And I get that the way the system works is, yep, you got to do it twice. But there are also folks who are going to come to us trying to advance additional changes beyond what's been before the Planning Commission. And so that's why I'm looking for some tools that will help make it clearer for our community to track, you know, the filed ordinance, what portion the Planning Commission has heard and recommended changes. It's still incumbent upon the board to engross those changes or not. But then how do we differentiate between if something is either a new argument or a new topic that hasn't gone through the Planning Commission? So I'm just looking for some tools that might help provide some of that clarity. That's all. So I'll just leave that there. We don't need to go over it any further, honest, or at least from my perspective, we don't. Maybe the rest of the board does. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going with the last couple. I appreciated that the Planning Commission talked about the priority question of quantity of units or variety and types and price points, because this middle housing work was done at the state legislature to try and advance allowances so that there would be more home construction to allow for more community members to enter the home ownership market. So that's really great. So what's left for me? Garages and sidewalks. So on slide 11 for garages, there's the model code. I get that. So the Planning Commission supported deleting the garage design standards. So what I'm trying to get around my head is if those garage design standards are removed, then what are we left with? That there are no garages at all, or no driveways? no capacity on site to park a car? That's the part that isn't clear to me.
Yeah. The focus of the design standards is mostly garage width when garages are on street frontages. If they're separated by housing from the street, these standards don't apply. But when they're along a street, the model code differentiates between different types of middle housing, and it applies a maximum width in feet to the garage door of certain types, and it applies a maximum garage width in percentage for other types as compared to the frontage of the parent lot. And it's really meant to control the bulk and scale of the garage. We do see some issues with that, some probably unnecessary difficulty. So staff is thinking that we would like to recommend simplifying the standards so that a developer has a choice of options for any attached housing type that come from these. And we also would probably propose the garage door width, the door width be what we regulate rather than the entire width of the garage. There are some standards in model code that do that and others that don't. So it seems like it should just be consistent.
Okay, so
without those things, there just would be no
that.
controls over garage size. There could be garages.
Yeah, okay, great. So I misunderstood PC supported deleting garage design standards. I read more into that. So thank you for enlightening me as to the whole variety of topics covered by the model code garage standards and the realm of possibilities for these different middle housing types. I know you've done a lot of exploration on examples, samples, what might it look like, what might it enable? Which brings me to my last topic of trying to get my head around it. And I will say that I appreciate that there will be a staff report coming. And if nothing else, I know I'm going to learn a lot more by reading that staff report. It will be clear to me after I spend the time to read it carefully and absorb the powerful work that you've done as staff and that the Planning Commission has considered. I am, however, pretty darn confused about sidewalks. I guess I'd forgotten that we don't seem to be requiring sidewalks with new construction. Yet, as I have for years walked around new development areas in the new UGB expansion areas, we've pretty much seen there are sidewalks in front of all those homes, no matter what style of home it is. And am I correct, or LUT
You are
experts?
correct. And it's actually the land division that triggers the sidewalk requirement. So it's not a requirement tied to an individual home. So these sidewalk requirements would be applied to a single detached house proposal where no land division is even proposed. And that's what's new.
Oh, so will it be more prevalent in cases of small infill lots? I guess what I'm grasping for is how do I best understand the categories, the type of, I'm worried about that end result, right? I agree with Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Willie that, or especially Commissioner Rogers, we don't have a community with homes if we don't have sidewalks. People need sidewalks. And we don't have enough money to go back and fix it later. We already don't have enough money to fix, to to fill all the gaps that already exist, let alone creating more gaps. That's it just doesn't make sense to me that we would expand the number of gaps. Let's grow that gap list. Woohoo! So I'm really struggling with understanding the complexity of in what cases sidewalks would be required, but more importantly, with this, in what cases would sidewalks not be required? Though I imagine that the savvy home developer or general construction, the person who builds the homes, might see it as a selling point.
Yeah, and some PC members did mention that. So when you talk about infill development, right now, if more than one unit were proposed on a property, for example, a duplex, or if or a triplex, say, or if any land division were proposed, even just to split a lot in two, we would require sidewalks. But we do not require sidewalks when somebody owns an existing lot, there are no sidewalks present, and they just want to build a house there. The middle housing state provisions don't allow us to require anything that's not explicitly stated in the rules or the model code, unless we also require it for one single detached dwelling, not the land division part of creating a subdivision or a partition, one dwelling. So that's what makes it necessary for us to apply this new requirement to a single detached dwelling if we want to apply it also to middle housing. And of course, that would mean in some cases lots of units. If it's townhouses, which are up to 25 units per acre, or cottage clusters with unlimited density restrictions, these could be larger projects, but we can only require for them what we require for one single detached dwelling according to the law.
Okay, so let me try and play this back. So if I own a lot today that allows a single detached dwelling, and I so choose, I could come in with a proposal for multiple units in this middle housing construct. Would I still, because it's still one lot, would I still not have to have sidewalks?
Under state provisions, you would not have to have sidewalks. Under our draft standards, you would have to have sidewalks.
Okay. But if I'm only building that single detached dwelling.
Yes, under the draft standards, you would have to build sidewalk, but not under our current community development code. This would be a new change to the standards for a single dwelling.
I think this is a really important distinction that maybe if I say it slightly differently, we have an existing community development code that's been on the books for a long time that for a lot of record does not require sidewalks.
Right.
If you're going to divide the property at all, you have to build the sidewalks.
I understand, yeah.
Then we filed an ordinance that said, no, we're going to change the rules. Now on any lot of record, if you build a single family house or duplex or other plexes, you're going to have to do the sidewalks. Then the planning commission has said, no, we don't want that new regulation to be in effect. So that's your question, whether you go with what's in the filed ordinance or take it out of the filed ordinance, which is what the planning commission wants you to do.
Yeah, all right, got it. Thank you. It was my failure to grasp the state of affairs. So,
no, it's quite complex.
It's a lot to grasp.
Right. There's what exists today, the filed ordinance, what could happen, lots of options here. Yep.
Well, and I understood hearing previously in the meeting, maybe it was from you, Mr. Roberts, that if we wanted to require it of single family detached, there would be some additional work to do as well. So I just remain in the camp that we need sidewalks in all cases. And if that means additional work, so be it. But we don't have complete communities without sidewalks. And in my opinion, we shouldn't make it worse, and go from there. So, whew, wowie zowie. A lot of complexity to track and follow. And I appreciate all this work, and I certainly appreciate having the time with all of you, presenting both what the filed ordinance has, what the Planning Commission discussed, considered, and is recommending, and what the possibilities might be moving forward. I think that sidewalk difference is the only one, if I understood everything, is the only one where I deviate from the Planning Commission recommendations. But we'll see. I'll learn more once I read the. Will the staff report only be on the filed ordinances, or will it summarize the filed and what the Planning Commission recommendations are?
It does that, yes. So it talks about the filed ordinance. It talks about what the Planning Commission recommended, and on those three policy issues then kind of lays them out, sort of how Andy was saying, what we do currently, how is it different in the filed ordinance, what did the Planning Commission recommend, and what are the kind of policy choices with that. So it kind of lays all that out for the board then to be able to provide the direction.
Okay, so we've just given you inclinations today, but it's the time for direction will be after we have the public hearings and our decision making with regard to engrossment, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a lot clearer. Thank you so much. Commissioners, any last thoughts?
I just want to echo, Chair, what you said about the value of the perspective of the Planning Commission. It's very helpful, and I'm really pleased that we have such thoughtful leaders there that can provide different perspectives and allow for us to be challenged in relationship to some of these issues. So thank you to them as well, and thank you, staff.
Commissioners, any last comments or things you wanted to come back to before we bring this topic to close? Nope, I'm not seeing anybody unmute or anything. All right, well, thank you again, Mr. Roberts, Ms. Kelly, Mr. Back, Ms. Cherniak, for all this excellent work, all of the exploration you've done, the research, the discussion with the Planning Commission, all those deliberations, and onward ho we go through the rest of the process, trying to make sure we get it all done by that requirement of June 30th, 2022.
Great. Thanks so much for your feedback and your time today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Great. So let me refer to our agenda now. We're going to need to have a motion to enter into executive session. We also need perhaps some break time, both for us as well as setup time for staff. So I think a 15-minute break is due. And but before we do that, we need to have a motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub H to consider potential litigation. We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers. We have a second from Vice Chair Willie. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Raise your hand. Okay, thank you, commissioners. It passed unanimously 5-0. So we'll see you on the other Zoom link for executive session at 3:45. Thank you, staff. Bye.